into the business of joining them. We're going to have almost every referral to the Finance Committee.
The economy, petroleum, and we have a committee overseeing that sector. And now we're dealing with management of the funds. And that management is always referred to the Finance Committee. And so just saying that that other committee should be part of it, a joint committee, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Yes.
Mr. Speaker, I made reference to the papers to be presented by the Minister for Finance. The annual report on the petroleum funds for the 2021 fiscal year. We are now in November. It should be clearer that he can specify the period for this particular report. If it is from January to June, they should state it. But so both 1 and 2.
Honorable Member, we are not debating the report yet. The report is now being presented to us. When you go to the report, you will find the details. And if there's an issue to raise on that, you raise it in the report to the House. But now it's just presentation. Honorable members, including the caption, you can't disagree with me on this matter. Whatever is laid here and referred to the committee is subject to the consideration of the committee. And if you see anything wrong, even with the caption, you have the right, including the left, to put it in your report. Of Finance and Mines and Energy. The second one, which deals with the collection and utilization of the African Union Import Levy for the year 2021 fiscal year, I think the proper committee referred it to be the Finance Committee. So it's accordingly referred to the Finance Committee. That is Romans 6A, item 6A, Roman 2. That this honorable House approves the budget statement and economic policy of the government for the year ending 31st December 2021. Minister for Finance. 2022, sorry. Our constituents are watching and listening to us.
Right, Honorable Speaker, Honorable Members of Parliament, on the authority of His Excellency President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, I beg to move that this august House approves the financial policy of the Government of Ghana for the year ending 31st December 2022. On the authority of His Excellency the President, and in accordance with Articles 179 and 180 of the 1992 Constitution, I present to this House the budget of the President of the Republic of Ghana for the 2022 financial year. I also do submit to this House the following statutory reports. 1, the 2021 annual report on the petroleum funds, in accordance with Section 48 of the Petroleum Revenue Management Act 2011, Act 815, as amended, and the 2021 report on the utilization of the African Union levies in accordance with Section 7 of the African Union Import Levies Act 2017, Act 952. Mr. Speaker, this statement is an abridged version of the budget statement and economic policy of the Government of Ghana for the 2022 financial year. I therefore request that the entire budget statement and economic policy of the Government of Ghana for the 2022 financial year be captured in the Hansard. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to take this opportunity to thank you and members of the House for prayers accorded me and citizens of the country during my COVID recuperation. Mr. Speaker, exactly 1 year, 8 months, and 5 days today, Ghana confirmed its first case of COVID-19. Since then, efforts to contain the virus and its impact on our lives have dominated the actions of government, not only here in Ghana, but across the globe. The COVID-19 pandemic, which has swept through the world, has upended and exposed the weaknesses in some of the critical structures and systems in education, health, economic life, communities, and everyday family life. The pandemic triggered a sharp and heavy slump in global supply chains as the lockdowns and restrictions led to reductions in demand and production levels. The pickup in demand for goods this year has also created a new inflationary problem with a consequential rise in the cost of shipping, disruption of the global supply chain, and exacerbated by increase in world fuel prices. Mr. Speaker, the spiraling costs of shipping have hit businesses hard, particularly small and medium-scale enterprises. SMEs have had to struggle with economic fallout from the pandemic, and furthermore, they are now being forced to cope with the rising costs of shipping. This is making the lives of traders and consumers very difficult. The hardship Ghanaians have experienced due to COVID-19 is not lost on the government. We have been there with the people, playing the difficult but necessary balancing act of managing an economy put under extreme distress by the pandemic, and at the same time supporting households and businesses to cope. Our response to COVID-19 thus far has earned domestic and worldwide acclaim, as our President and his fellow Ghanaians will attest to. Mr. Speaker, it has not been easy, and I know that from personal experience. The government has tried its best to save lives and cushion the impact on Ghanaians. It has been tough, but we thank God for His grace and mercy towards us. We empathize with families who lost loved ones during the pandemic, private school teachers who lost income for 12 months, business owners who lost earnings, the thousands of hospitality and tourism sector workers who were laid, young people whose strenuous efforts to find work have been further compromised by the pandemic, and the impact on our mental health and well-being, which has also been profound. Mr. Speaker, His Excellency the President has asked me to deliver a special message to our fellow Ghanaians. He says to thank you, the Ghanaian people, for your resilience. To thank you for keeping faith with Him and responding to all the measures that were needed to contain the spread of the virus. He wants to assure you that together we are fighting this, and we are fighting this to win together. Mr. Speaker, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had to address both the immediate as well as persistent health and economic impacts of the pandemic. Our response was bold, decisive, and compassionate, but also costly. As a responsible government, alive to the concerns of the people, we have had no choice but to implement critical interventions to save lives and jobs, including feeding nearly 2 packages. Mr. Speaker, to mitigate the health impact of the pandemic, government also employed additional 38,000 nurses. Tax exemptions worth 36.8 million Ghana cedis were also granted to our frontline staff, while 10.1 million and 4.78 million households were provided with free water and electricity, respectively. To facilitate the mass reopening of schools, government provided 11 million students and staff with essential supplies such as face masks, paper towels, liquid soap, and sanitizers, all at great cost. Cooked meals were also provided to final year JHS students in both public and private schools. Mr. Speaker, these have been expensive, but we knew that the cost of doing nothing and disrupting the education of our children for an entire academic year would have been even greater. I'm proud to announce that not a single Ghanaian public, and we are grateful to the unions for their cooperation in this regard. Under the Coronavirus Alleviation Program Business Support Scheme, CAPBACS, Ghana Enterprises Agency provided 302,000 successful applicants across various sectors and regions with loans amounting to 523.11 million Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, we also ensured payments of our obligations to contractors and provided payroll support to some state-owned enterprises to guarantee jobs. Thankfully, our president led and acted decisively and wisely, and his leadership paved the way for many other countries in Africa and beyond. Get back quickly to the pre-pandemic fiscal and debt trajectory. The fiscal policies implemented to provide relief during the pandemic has led to an increase in total public debt. The situation was made worse by the big drop in revenue collections last year. Total revenues in 2020 fell by 11.93 billion, equivalent to 3.1% of GDP, while total expenditures increased by 14.08 billion, equivalent to 3.7% of GDP. As a result, recorded against a target of 4.7% of GDP, including the financial sector and energy sector related expenditure. The budget deficit was 15.0% of GDP. GDP growth also dropped to 0.4% compared to a projected growth rate of 6.8% before the pandemic. This growth 1.7%. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker,
Honorable members,
we are under no illusion.
just a minute. The first Deputy Speaker to take the chair.
Beg your pardon? Shall I continue? Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are under no illusion as to the economic to ease the suffering of Ghanaians, transform the economy, how to ease the suffering of Ghanaians, transform the economy to create jobs, and share the expected wealth across all households, such as providing security and education, I would keep the President awake at night. Yes, and at the same time build with urgency the needed infrastructure, collecting revenue, managing our debt and expenditure commitments, and paying the bills to stimulate economic activity are the orders he has given to us, his ministers, and other appointees to carry out over the next 3 years. Mr. Speaker, we know we can get the job done. It is well known that prior to the pandemic, we had stabilized and turned out. we had been able to reverse the worrying economic trends we inherited and place the country on a path of fiscal sustainability and growth. We doubled the economic growth rate from 3.4 percentage points to an average of 7% between the period. It is undisputed, Mr. Speaker, that we brought down the fiscal deficit below the 5% threshold. Imports, we provided free SHS for 1.2 million Ghanaian students. We provided free hot meals for 3.4 million public pupils in basic schools. We supported 1.9 million farmers with improved seedlings and fertilizers through our Planting for Food and Jobs program. We provided temporary employment to 100,000 of young people through the NAPCO program. We abolished several Newton taxes. We set the nation on its biggest private sector-owned industrialization program in the history of Ghana. We registered the biggest foreign exchange earnings from tourists during our historic 2019 year of return program. By March 2020, Mr. Speaker, our first quarter macro fiscal indicators reflected the turnaround we had accomplished over the 3.5 years. Indeed, we had just experienced an oversubscription of our 3 billion bond issuance and set a record of the longest sovereign Africa bond of 41 years on the international capital markets as a result of strong investor confidence. Mr. Speaker, then COVID struck. The program we had attained the previous year, the focus on the 2021 budget statement and policy presented on 12 March 2021 was therefore anchored on debt sustainability and consolidation while providing some fiscal stimulus. We set out to complete ongoing programs and projects, consolidate the gains from the recovery efforts, and continue our agenda towards the revitalization and transformation of the economy. Today, 17th November 2021, I'm here on behalf of His Excellency the President to provide this august House the confidence Ghanaians repose in him with a renewed mandate on 7 December 2020. I also share with you the plan to get us back to pre-pandemic macro stability and growth levels. More importantly, Mr. Speaker, I will share the President's strategy to improve the living standards of Ghanaians and address the central challenge that confronts us today, unemployment. Mr. Speaker, we have no doubt in our capacity as a government to turn things around. We turned around the economic crisis we inherited in 2017. We are turning around the economic crisis in 2020. The challenge is on, and we are determined to prevail, and with the people behind us and the Almighty on our side, we know we shall prevail. The budget is intentional about building a sustainable entrepreneurial nation through fiscal consolidation and job creation. This may be an uncomfortable transition, but we are people who think deeply. We must progress and become a people who also make things happen for ourselves and the world. We must embrace this challenge, Mr. Speaker, of becoming a vibrant entrepreneurial nation. Mr. Speaker, data on the performance of the economy is largely on track. Provisional GDP data released by the Ghana Statistical Service in September 2021 indicate that overall real GDP grew by 3.1% in Q1 and 3.9% in Q2. Thus, the economy grew by an average of 3.5% in the first half of 2021 against the 0.8% in the same period, 2020. Mr. Speaker, headline inflation declined sharply from 10.4% in December 2020 to 7.5% in May 2021, broadly reflecting well-anchored inflation expectations, exchange rate stability, and favorable food prices. And on account of stocks from domestic fuel price adjustments and increasing domestic food prices arising partly from climate-related factors, input supply bottlenecks, delayed harvests, and world food price increases. Inflation rose further to 11% in October, driven by non-food inflation. Mr. Speaker, preliminary data for the first 9 months of the year indicate that government's fiscal operations resulted in a cash deficit of 33.9 billion, equivalent to 7.7% of GDP, compared to the revised target of 32.6 billion, equivalent to 7.4% of GDP. Have elevated global debt levels. The situation in Ghana is no different. The provisional nominal debt stock, including financial sector bailout costs and energy sector IPP payments, stood at 341.76 billion, equivalent to 77.5% of GDP as at end September 2021, up from 291.63 billion, equivalent to 76.1% in December 2020. Notwithstanding the elevated deficit and public debt levels recorded due to COVID-19, our macro-fiscal indicators are much better than what we inherited. Inflation reduced from 15.4% at the end of 2016 to 7.9% at the end of 2019 and stood at 11% at end October 2021. Interest 17 to 14.69% at the end of 2019 and further to 12.46% at the end of October 2021. Gross international reserves increased from 2.8 months of imports at the end of 2016 to 4 months of imports at the end of 2019 and further to 4.9 months of imports at the end of September 2021. While fiscal deficit reduced from 6.5% of GDP at the end of 2016 to 4.8% of GDP at the end of 2019. Primary balance, Mr. Speaker, improved from a deficit of reduced from 1.1% of GDP at the end of 2017 to a primary surplus of 0.8% at the end of 2016 to 6.5% at the end of 2019. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the medium-term macroeconomic targets. A new medium-term National Development Policy Framework 2022 to 2025 has been drafted to guide the medium-term economic recovery and transformation for the country. This is consistent with the Ghana Beyond Aid agenda and is informed by a COVID-19 response strategy outlined in the Ghana Cares Ofori-Atta. Support the medium-term objectives include 1. Restoration of macroeconomic stability with a focus on fiscal consolidation and debt sustainability. 2. Maintaining a healthy balance between the implementation of the Revitalization Transformation Program and fiscal consolidation to promote growth within a stable macroeconomic environment. 3. Providing an environment that is supportive of private sector, including promoting entrepreneurship for domestic businesses and for FDI to thrive. 4. Building a robust financial sector more efficiently and effectively to support socioeconomic transformation. 6. Implementing reforms to increase revenue mobilization and the efficiency of public expenditure. And 7. Plugging leakages and prosecution of offenders. Mr. Speaker, guided by the medium-term policy objectives, the following macroeconomic targets are set for the medium term, 2022 to 2025. 1. Overall real GDP to grow at an average rate of 5.6%. 2. Non-oil GDP to grow at an average rate of 5.9%, 8 plus or minus 2%. 4. Overall fiscal balance and primary balance to return to the fiscal responsibility at threshold targets by 2024, i.e. fiscal deficit of not more than 5% of GDP and a positive primary balance. And gross international reserves to cover at least 4 months of imports. Mr. Speaker, Based on the macroeconomic objectives and the medium-term targets, the following macroeconomic targets are set for 2022. Overall real GDP growth of 5.8%, fiscal deficit of 7.4%. Primary surplus of 0.1% of GDP and gross international reserves to cover not less than 4 months of imports. Mr. Speaker, total revenue and grants for 2022 is projected to rise above 100 billion for the first time, 100.5 billion Ghana cedis, equivalent to 20% of GDP, up from a projected outturn of 70.3 billion, equivalent to 16% of GDP for 2021. Domestic revenue estimated at 99.5 billion and represents an annual growth of 44% over the projected outturn for 2021. Mr. Speaker, the resource mobilization for 2022 is underpinned by revenue policy initiatives. The increase in domestic progressive tax policy, complemented by improvements in tax compliance and reforms in revenue administration that we have outlined in this budget. Mr. Speaker, total expenditure, including clearance of arrears, is projected at 137.5 billion, equivalent to 27.4% of GDP. The estimate for 2022 represents a growth of 23.2% above the projected outturn. The key drivers of expenditure growth include capital expenditure, funding of key government flagship programs, wage bills, and interest payments. Mr. Speaker, based on the estimates of total revenue and grants and total expenditure, the 2022 fiscal operations will result in an overall fiscal deficit of Ghana 37 billion, equivalent to 7.4% of GDP. This includes the financial sector and energy sector IPP payments. This represents a nominal year-on-year reduction of about 30.7% over the projected outturn of 0.1% of GDP is also projected for this year. For next year, the signaling is clear. We are going to judiciously work our way out of our debt situation. Mr. Speaker, total foreign financing of the deficit, as well as exceptional financing, namely the IMF special drawing rights, would amount to 9.1 billion, equivalent to 1.8% of GDP, and will include a planned international financing program of 750 billion for liability management and budget support, particularly capital expenditure. On the other hand, financing will amount to 27.9 billion, equivalent to 5.6% of GDP. The additional exceptional financing from the utilization of the newly allocated SDRs by the IMF will augment and reduce domestic borrowing needs. Mr. Secretary, we still rely heavily on debt treatment that on the expenditure side, for instance, interest payments and compensation payments alone amounted to 48.7 billion, which is 103.3% of total revenue and grants for January to September 2021. In fact, Mr. Speaker, this trend must be reversed. Mr. Speaker, a key focus of the budget is fiscal consolidation to enhance debt and fiscal sustainability as we implement our economic revitalization and transformation post-COVID-19 to save more lives from the COVID pandemic and better the lives of Ghanaians. Expenditure rationalization measures in this budget. Indeed, the approval and implementation of the measures will lead to significant fiscal adjustment from a projected fiscal deficit, including energy, IPP payments, and FinSec cleanup costs of 12.1% of GDP in 2021 to 7.4% in 2022, representing a strong adjustment of 4.7 percentage points in just 1 year. Mr. Speaker, not only are we significantly bringing the fiscal deficit down, we are posting a primary surplus, negative primary balance of 4.7% in 2021. We are confident, though, that the needed fiscal space to continue to support broad-based inclusive growth will not elude us. Mr. Speaker, as a people, we are very proud of our history and heritage. We believe in our ability to be served on small farmlands. These farmers bring in some $2 billion annually. We believe in our capability to mobilize the resources, human, natural, and domestic finances to transform our lives. This will require that we share the burden so that every adult Ghanaian will contribute to the delivery of critical infrastructure, social services, and improved lives. This revenue mobilization must be a collective effort, and we must all contribute to make this a reality. Report on the 2021 population and housing census. The census provided useful information that would inform the effective planning and implementation of government policies. However, the data presented also shows some trends that need to be addressed to build a more equitable society. Interestingly, out of the total population of 30.8 million, 8 persons are bearing the burden of the entire population as taxpayers as at August 2021. Registered voter population of 17,027,941 as at 2020. Only 1,600,000 to Tier 1 pensions and 2.1 million, less than 10% of the total population, as active contributors to Tier 2 as of June 2021. Only 45,109 entities are registered as corporate taxpayers. Only 54,364 persons are registered as self-employed taxpayers at the Ghana Revenue Authority, and only 136,198 in 2021, of which 80% are self-employed. Mr. Speaker, compared to our peers within the middle income brackets, these statistics are a poor reflection on us, and we need to change the narrative. We must resolve by the next census, we should have changed these statistics to become an upper middle income country in line with our Ghana Beyond Aid agenda. We must far eclipse by 2024. Mr. Speaker, below are the regional breakdown of tax contributions from 2017 to 2021. Mr. Speaker, Greater Accra contributes almost 90% of our domestic tax, and Ashanti, Western, and Eastern regions together contribute barely 3% to making the vision of Ghana Beyond Aid a reality. We cannot, therefore, as a nation, continue to depend on only 8.2% of our citizens to carry the burden of 30.8 million people. This is unsustainable and defeats all the tenets of economic prudence and moral justice. Our resolve to use revenue policy to support local industry and generate the desired environment for growth has not waned. In this respect, it has become increasingly necessary to make some policy changes. Mr. Speaker, in 2019, VAT relief was provided on African prints for textile manufacturers to enable them resuscitate their operations and provide affordable textiles on the market. The policy has succeeded in stabilizing the industry and formed the basis for a modest increase in production. The companies have also maintained their prices over the period, making the cost of local prints affordable. Additionally, they've been able to keep their employees and made some investment in the industry. Government has decided to extend the relief for a further 2 years. Mr. Speaker, the VAT flat rate of 3% of the sale price of goods was introduced in 2017 on the supply of goods by wholesalers and retailers, subsequent reforms to the taxes on the supply of goods and services have made local goods with imported substitutes uncompetitive. Government is correcting this anomaly. The object of the flat rate is to provide a simplified system for small-scale enterprises. To ensure that this objective is achieved, the rate will be applied to retailers with annual turnover not exceeding 500,000 Ghana cedis. All other retailers and wholesalers will be charged the standard rate. After 2.5 years of operation, the temporary benchmark discount policy on imports introduced as a stopgap measure has been reviewed to make it more efficient and better targeted. This is consistent with government policy to promote local industry and improve foreign exchange earnings. We are committed to a program of turning our enterprise into industrial growth. Mr. Speaker, revenue compliance and enforcement sits at the heart of domestic revenue mobilization. The Ghana Revenue Authority, buoyed by the Revenue Assurance and Compliance Enforcement, will continue race with its enhanced compliance measures to expand coverage and plug revenue leakages. The modified taxation system introduced in 2015 through the Income Tax Act 2015, Act 896, is to provide a simplified system of tax compliance for the informal sector and small-scale individuals in business. This law will be amended. Exports of unprocessed gold by small-scale miners through official channels have dwindled from over 1,600,000 ounces in 2019 to below 100,000 ounces as of September 2021 through smuggling. To stem this tide, government, in consultation with the stakeholders in the industry, has decided to reduce the withholding tax rate for sale of unprocessed gold by small-scale miners on whom the incidence of the tax, to working with the relevant agencies and stakeholders in the industry to ensure compliance at a reduced rate of 1.5%. Mr. Speaker, property rates have the potential to increase revenue mobilization for MMDAs and release resources for provision of basic infrastructure as well as the needs of our localities. Property rate assessment and collection pose a challenge to most MMDAs and are fraught with inefficiencies. Government through GRA will from January 2022 assist the MMDAs to implement a common platform for property rate administration to enhance property rate collections and its accountability. To ensure cost recovery by government in providing infrastructure and charges. Government will complete its work of this House to pass the fees and charges bill for implementation in 2022. These fees and charges will be subject to automatic adjustment consistent with the annual average inflation as announced by the Ghana Statistical Service. A comprehensive review will be conducted after every 5th year, taking into consideration other factors besides inflation, including improvement in quality of service, delivery, and privatization. Fixing and building. Our roads are being fixed. It is true that more roads have been fixed and are being fixed over the last 5 years than any relative period in the entire history of our nation. We even want to do a lot more, and this budget will cater for this. That is why for decades, governments after governments imposed and maintained tolls on some public roads to raise funds for road construction and maintenance. This is the situation in many countries. However, over the years, from one place to the other, and impacted negatively on productivity. The congestion generated at the tolling points, besides creating these inconveniences, also leads to pollution in and around the vicinities. To address these challenges, government has abolished all tolls on public roads and bridges. This takes effect immediately the budget is approved on appropriation. The toll collection personnel The toll collection personnel will be reassigned. The expected impact on productivity and reduced environmental pollution will more than offset the revenue foregone by removing the tolls. Tolls, Mr. Speaker, would be abolished on all public roads. Mr. Speaker, over the past 18 months, it has become clear that if the African continent is to be globally competitive, it must embrace the common vision of creating an integrated and inclusive digital society that improves the quality of life of citizens, strengthens the development of the private sector, and advances Africa's quest to attain the Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. Speaker, digitization is empowering. It has catalyzed financial inclusion. It mobilizes resources and directs it where it is needed. Tens of billions of Ghanaian cedis are mobilized every month and by people previously presumed too poor to open and keep a traditional bank account or even operate a mobile phone. With millions of Ghanaians tapping into the convenience of simplified online paying systems, transactions that used to take place on the blind side of the central bank is now fully visible. It is contributing to the formalization of our economy, a subject about which so much had been said for years, but which so little had been actually done. With digitization, state institutions are more able to plug revenue leakages and thus increase internally generated funds. That gives them the capacity to potentially pay their workers better wages and reduce borrowing by central government for capital expenditure because they can go to a bank on the strength of their own books and so reduce the country's debt overhang over time. Mr. Speaker, the Ghana.gov initiative and its performance also indicate the opportunity to harness increases in captured economic actors from 4% to 84%, which creates a real chance to achieve the intended expansion of the tax net. Currently, we have 49 institutions of transactions through Ghana.gov. However, the number of institutions expected to go live by end November 2021 is 165. The total value of transactions from May 2021 to October 2021 amounted to 34 billion. We believe this initiative will be truly transformative of our revenue mobilization and service delivery agenda. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 contributed to the acceleration of the digitalization of Africa. Data from the Bank of Ghana confirms a growing trend in online trade. The data showed that between February 2020 and February 2021 alone, Ghana saw an increase of over 120% in the value of digital transactions compared to 44% for the period February 2019 to February 2020. Apart from the convenience online trading offers, the surge has happened globally was primarily due to the increase in the use of digital platforms as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Total value of transactions for 2020 was estimated to be over 500 billion Ghana cedis compared to 78 billion cedis in 2016, just 5 years ago. While total money subscribers and active mobile money users have grown by an average rate of 18% and 16% respectively between 2016 and 2019. Mr. Speaker, it has become clear that there is this enormous potential to increase tax revenue by bringing into the tax bracket transactions that could be best defined as being undertaken in the informal economy. After considerable deliberation, government has decided to place a levy on all electronic transactions to to widen the tax net and rope in the informal sector. This shall be known as the Electronic Transaction Levy or e-levy. Mr. Speaker, electronic transactions covering mobile money payments. Mr. Speaker,
honourable members, order.
Electronic mobile money payments, bank transfers, merchant payments, and e-mode remittances will be charged at an applicable rate of 1.75%, which shall be borne by the sender, except e-mode remittances, which will be borne by the recipient. Mr. Speaker, to safeguard efforts be made to enhance financial inclusion and protect the vulnerable, all transactions that add up to 100 Ghana cedis or less per day, which is approximately 3,000 Ghana cedis per month, will be exempt from this levy. A portion of the proceeds from the e-levy will be used to support entrepreneurship, youth employment, cybersecurity, digital and road infrastructure, among others. Mr. Speaker, taxi eyabako yinyina betua. This tax is one, and we shall all pay. Mr. Speaker, this new policy also comes into effect once appropriation is passed on 1st January 2022. Government will work with all industry partners to ensure that their systems and payment platforms are configured to implement this policy.
And they will make money from there.
Mr. Speaker, burden sharing. The good people of Ghana have given us a mandate to get things done. For us as a government, this is a clarion call for a new deal, a chance to renew the social contract of our democracy. As Rainbow Neighbor once said, and I quote, "Nothing worth doing is completed in our lifetime, therefore we must be saved by hope. Nothing true or beautiful or good makes complete sense in any immediate context of history, therefore we must be saved by faith. Nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone, therefore we are saved by love. Therefore we need to act together as each other's keeper after the unprecedented shock that the pandemic was for the world and for Ghana. We owe each other to share the burden of the recovery. Citizens that have not suffered as much a loss of income during the pandemic ought to sacrifice for the rest. Citizens should be called upon to look beyond their own self-interest and work for a great common interest. Our country needs this sacrifice. This budget calls upon the wealthy and the middle class to do their part through property taxes, through streamlined exemptions bills, through the removal of benchmark values as selected imported goods, and through targeted digital tax. In doing so, they will also look after future generations by limiting debt accumulation. Mr. Speaker, after undergoing several reviews, the exemption bill has been completed and laid before Parliament. We will work with this House for final passage and implementation in 2022. Mr. Speaker, we wish to reiterate that we are in challenging times which require radical measures, so let us embrace these new policies to enable government to address the fundamental issues affecting the economy, to ensure that our nation continues to maintain its position as the black star of the continent. The good people of Ghana has given us a mandate to get things done. For us, as a government, this is a clarion call for a new deal, a chance to renew the social contract. Mr. Speaker, we are building a sustainable entrepreneurial nation. The census results put Ghana's population figure at 30.8 million. And of this number, 42.8% constitute the adult population above 18 years, while 58.2% constitute the population below 18 years. Mr. Speaker, with this youthful population, there's an urgent need to provide the necessary environment for the private sector. In this regard, government will implement a major intervention to empower existing private sector businesses to be robust and dynamic, to expand and create jobs, whilst giving a strong hand up to the youth. Mr. Speaker, in the past 15 years, successive governments have endeavored to implement various employment schemes to partially address the unemployment situation in the country. In 2006, President Kufuor initiated the Youth Employment Scheme, which provided meaningful employment avenues to many of our youth. Since then, we have implemented a number of such schemes, with the current ones being NAPCO, 100,000 youth covered, YEA, 80,538 beneficiaries, afforestation, 44,682 youth engaged, National Alternative Employment and Livelihood Program. In addition, government has employed some 295,000 into the public sector payroll since 2017 alone, and in 2021 alone, financial clearance totaling 72,825 has been granted. Mr. Speaker, in spite of these efforts, we continue to have a huge number of our young people without jobs. Mr. Speaker, this budget is redefining our development paradigm by focusing on the private sector, on entrepreneurship development. We will build an entrepreneurial nation by aggressively implementing programs that empowers the majority of our young people to employ their God-given talents, to take risks and become job creators instead of job seekers.
Honorable Minister, hold on. Honorable members, having regards to the state of the business of the House, I direct that the House sits outside the regular sitting hours. You may continue. You may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.